Hello students, today we are going to do the 11th lesson of your English reader, Love Across the Salt Desert, written by Keki and Daruwalla. This story tells us about how love can bridge deserts, love can cross borders. This story is a cross-border love story between an Indian boy called Najib and a Pakistani girl called Fatima. The Run of Kutch is a very dry and desolate area, extremely difficult to cross. Yet, Najib Hussain takes this risk for a very special reason. What was the reason? The salt desert that we read about in the title of the story refers to the Run of Kutch, which is the desert that is there between India and Pakistan on the border of Gujarat. So we find that in this story the Indian boy Najib is ready to cross the desert, this Run of Kutch, to bring his love Fatima from across the border. The drought in Kutch had lasted for 3 successive years. Even when the clouds were sighted, they passed by, ignoring the stricken country. The run lay like a paralyzed monster. The earth had cracked, and it looked as if chunks of it had been baked in a kiln and then embedded in the soil crust. So, in the district of Kutch in Gujarat, the drought had lasted for 3 successive years. Drought refers to a period of time when there is no rains. So, for 3 continuous years there had been drought in Kutch. This is the beginning of the story, and it is in Kutch that Najib Hussain, the protagonist or the main character in the story, is living. And in his place, in this place called Kutch, there had been 3 continuous years of drought. There had been no clouds and there were no rains. The run, the place, that is the Run of Kutch, lay like a paralyzed monster. Monster is a huge animal like creature. So just like a huge animal that gets very tired and then lies down, paralyzed without any movement, this Run of Kutch, which had not received any rains, it seemed to be like a paralyzed monster. The earth had cracked because there were no rains. The ground was all dry and the earth had cracked, and it looked as if chunks of it had been baked in a kiln. Kiln is a fireplace where baking is done. So it seemed the earth, which was cracked and dry, it looked like as if the earth had been baked in a fireplace and then it had been put back in the soil crust. The cattle became thin and emaciated. Emaciated means reduced in energy. Why the cattle had become thin and reduced in energy? Because they did not get any water or even food properly to eat. The oxen died. The camel alone survived comfortably, feeding on the bawal, camel thorn. The camel, which doesn't need water like as much water like other animals, it was the only animal that survived comfortably. It had camel thorn to feed on, or that's also called as the bawal. So camel thorn is a thorny bushy type of plant that can survive even when there's not much water. So the camel fed on the camel thorn. Then one day the clouds rolled in, and the lightning crackled, and the clouds burst. But after 3 successive years of drought, 3 continuous years of drought, the clouds rolled in and it burst. That means it started to rain. Though 2 years have passed since the drought ended. So 3 years of drought, and after that 2 years also have ended. Everyone remembers that it first rained on the day when Fatima entered. So when did it first start to rain after 3 years? The day when Fatima entered the village. Who was Fatima? She is the female protagonist of this story. The female main character in this story. The Pakistani girl. When she entered Najib's village, the village refers to Najib's village. When she entered the village, that was the first time after 3 long years of drought that it started to rain. This is how she came to the village. So when Fatima came, 3 successive years of drought ended and it started to rain. And all the people in the village welcomed the rains as well as Fatima, because she seemed to bring good luck to the village. That is why it had started to rain when she came to the village. So even though she was from across the border, all the people in the village welcomed her. They must have welcomed her. Now, how did she come to the village? We'll read in this story how she came to the village. What would he not do for her, the daughter of the spice seller? He refers to Najib. The daughter of the spice seller refers to Fatima. So Fatima was the daughter of a spice seller. Her father sold spice. What do you mean by spice? Spice refers to sweet smelling things that are added to food to make it tastier. Cloves, cinnamon, these are all spices. So her father was a spice seller. She who smelt of cloves and cinnamon, whose laughter had the timbre of ankle bells, whose eyebrows were like black wisps of the night, and whose hair was the night itself. For her he would cross the salt desert. So he was ready to cross the salt desert for Fatima. Najib was ready to cross the salt desert for Fatima. And she is described over here. She had the smell of cloves and cinnamon. Her laughter also he liked very much. It had the timbre of ankle bells. Ankle bells matlab pile. The ringing of ankle bells ki tarah tha her laughter, whose eyebrows were like black wisps, and the night, and whose hair was the night itself. Means she had dark hair and black wisps ki tarah tha eyebrows. And for her, yes, her matlab Fatima, Najib was ready to even cross the salt desert. The salt desert, I told you, refers to the desert between India and Pakistan, that is there along the Gujarat border. So for her, he was ready to cross the salt desert, even though it was a very dangerous task. He had stayed the day at Kala Dungar. So we are going to read about his journey from Kutch, that is where he lived, to across the border to Pakistan. So on the way, what had he done? He had stayed the day at Kala Dungar. So he had left his village and he had slowly gone across the border. So as he left his village, he came to a place called Kala Dungar. and he had stayed the day. So one day he stayed there. What was this Kala Dungar? It was a black hill capped with basalt, the highest in Kutch. So it was a high hill. It was a hill that was the highest point in Kutch. He had set his camel, Allah Rakha, free to crop on the bawal trees. The camel, its name is given here, Allah Rakha, had been set free to feed on the bawal trees. At dusk he paid homage to the footprints of the Panchmai Peer on the hilltop. In Kala Dungar there was a hilltop where the footprints of the Panchmai Peer was there, and it was a custom in Kala Dungar for travelers to pay homage to the footprints of the Panchmai Peer, and Najab also had done the same. He had paid homage. Paid homage का मतलब है he had shown respect by going and bowing to the footprints of the Panchmai Peer. He left some food there and started beating on the thali according to the custom here. In a few minutes, jackals appeared from nowhere and gobbled up the food. So it was the custom in Kala Dungar for travelers to go and pay homage to the footprints of the Panchmai Peer, and then they would keep some food over there, and by beating on the thali, they would call the animals, the jackals, who would come and eat up the food, gobble up the food. This was auspicious. This was a good sign. Jackals coming and eating up the food. It was a good sign. Why? If they had not turned up, he would have considered the ill effects of the omen serious enough to have cancelled the journey. If the jackals hadn't come and eaten the food, then it would not have been auspicious to continue the journey. It would have brought ill effects if he continued the journey. Then he would have had to cancel his journey. But here we see the jackals came and gobbled up the food. So he thought now it is auspicious to continue the journey. A lamp was lighted in the Peer's hour every night on the hilltop of the hilltop, and the flame could be seen all the way from Khavda. Khavda was Najab's village. Even from his village, the flame that was lighted in the Panchmai Peer's honor could be seen even far away from his village, from Najab's village, Khavda. This was a high point, the Kala Dungar, this place called Kala Dungar. So it could be seen from very far away. Over 100 years earlier, the Panchmai Peer had trudged these salt ways, serving the people, accompanied as legend had it by a jackal. So the story behind Panchmai Peer was that about 100 years before, Panchmai Peer had walked these places, salt ways. That is, these places, that was the salt desert. He had walked about. Trudged means walking about. And he had served the people. And along with the Panchmai Peer, the story goes that there was a jackal. His companion was a jackal. Reclusive by habit, he used to retire to thorn jungles. He was reclusive by habit. That is, he did not have other human companions. He used to move about all alone. He used to retire to thorn jungles, and he did not live among other people. He used to go and take rest in the jungles, where apart from his vulpine companions, none else dared to disturb his nocturnal trysts. So, in the jungles, he had these companions, his vulpine companions, that is, fox companions or jackals, who were his companions. None else dared to disturb his nocturnal trysts. So when he used to move about, even at night, nocturnal means even at night he used to move about. Tab who used to accompany him? Jackal. So the jackals were his companions. The custom of feeding the jackals had lingered since then. So even after 100 years now, the jackals who were the companions of the Panchmai Pir, they used to come and eat the food kept there by the by the travelers. Najab bowed before the flame and set out. So one full day Najab had stayed at Kala Dungar. He had paid homage to the footprints of the Panchmai Pir, and after that, now at night, that is when evening came, he is again continuing his journey to cross the desert. He left behind the camel thorn shrubs and the areas once famous for its savannas of stunted grass, but now sere and brown as the desert. So, as he is continuing his journey, now the plants, the camel thorn shrubs, and the area once famous for its savannas of stunted grass. Savannas means large areas of land covered with grass. So, the places where there were plants, shrubs, and stunted grass, he left behind. Means आगे क्या है? Desert only, where there is only sand all around, no plants, no people. He had left behind all human habitation, Quran being the last village. Now he came to the last village. The name of the village is Quran, and after that only desert is there. No people live beyond this village, and there was only sand all around. For the next 3 days, he would not be seeing any bhungas, those one room mud houses, circular at the base but tapering into a conical thatched roofs at the top. So in Quran, there were these local houses called bhungas. They were one room mud houses. They were circular in shape. Over the roof it was thatched and it was conical in shape. Now after this village he would not be seeing any of these houses, bhungas. Now only the sands stretched out before him, mile upon mile. So people he would not be seeing, he would only be seeing miles and miles of sand. Water splashed in the chuggles. Chuggles refers to the water containers made of animal skin. So these water containers called chuggles, chuggle he had taken with him, usme pani hai. With the name of the Pir on his lips, Najib Hussain set forth. So now with a prayer on his lips, he is going to cross the desert. Now what kind of person was Najib? Najib's diffidence was notorious among his friends. Diffidence means lack of confidence. He was not at all a confident boy, and all his friends knew that. It was notorious among his friends, his diffidence. Notorious means being famous in a bad way. So not having confidence is a bad quality. For that he was famous, or you can say in a bad way being famous, that's called notorious. His friends all knew it. He was known to have blushed at the mere mention of a girl. He was very shy with girls also. Even if the name of a girl was mentioned, he would blush. He would feel very awkward. A strangely introverted lad with dreamy eyes. He was a very introverted lad. Introvert is a person who is very quiet and private. He is not very social. He doesn't mix up with others very much. No one had ever associated him with any act of bravado. So he was a very quiet type of boy. He lacked confidence. So nobody thought he could do any brave acts. Nobody thought he would be brave enough to cross the desert. Even his father Aftab would say, "All that my ancestors and I have acquired during 100 years, this boy will squander away, not because he is a spendthrift, but because he will be too shy to charge money for what he sells." Even his father used to say about Najab, "Whatever my ancestors and I have acquired during 100 years, so whatever we have earned over 100 years, this lad, that is Najab, my son, he will squander away, that is, he will waste away. Not that he is a spendthrift, he doesn't spend money and waste money, but because he is too shy to charge money for what he sells. He is afraid. He is too shy to ask people to give money for what they have bought." He was lacking in so much of confidence even. Najab had crossed the run on 4 occasions earlier, though he had turned 20 only a month ago. But each time he had either accompanied his father or that wily old smuggler Zaman, the veteran of 100 illegal trips into Sindh. This is the province of Pakistan, Sindh province of Pakistan. So earlier he had crossed the run of Kutch, the desert, which is there along the border. This desert is there along the border of Gujarat. On 4 occasions he had crossed the border, not alone. Before he had become 20, he had already crossed the border 4 times. Along with either his father, he had gone across the border, or with a very cunning, wily means cunning old smuggler was there in their village. His name was Zaman. So either with his father or with this old smuggler called Zaman, he had crossed the border 4 times earlier. This Zaman was the veteran of 100 illegal trips into Sindh. This smuggler Zaman, 100 times at least he had crossed the border illegally, that is, going against the law without any proper legal papers. He had crossed the border. Each time they had taken tendu leaves worth about 500 rupees and sold it across the border for 1200. So for a small gain, they used to smuggle tendu leaves. Tendu leaves are beedi leaves, and from India they would buy it for 500 rupees, and going across the border they would go and sell it for 1200 rupees. But between the payoff to officials and to the intermediaries who arranged the sale of the beedi leaves, to the man who took the camel out to graze, and to the friend or relative who harbored them, there was precious little left. So 500 ke liye kharidte hai, and they would sell it for 1200 rupees. Even then, this 700 rupees they did not get it all, because they had to pay officials and intermediaries, people who used to help them in crossing the border, such officials, and then those intermediaries, those who would stand in between to arrange the sale of the beedi leaf in Pakistan. And then there were other people who used to help in taking care of the camel, and there were friends or relatives who would help them in their stay in Pakistan. So to all these people, they had to do payoffs. They had to give some money. So after all the expenses, there was precious little left, very little left. So very little gain ke liye these smugglers, that is Zaman, even Najab and his father, they also used to smuggle the beedi leaves. So these smugglers, they used to go across the border for such small gains. It was just enough to buy some used Terlin garments or cloves, and then it was time to make the long trek back across the desert. So earlier 4 times when he had gone across the border with his father or with Zaman, the smuggler, old smuggler, they used to sell the tendu leaves, and the very little money that they used to get from selling it across the border, they used to buy terlin garments, that is special dresses, or they used to buy spices like cloves, and then they would make the long trek back across the desert. They would come back along the desert. It was during one of these trips that he had stayed with Kale Shah, the clove seller. So, out of the 4 occasions he had gone across the border, one of these trips he had stayed with Kale Shah, the clove seller. Who was Kale Shah? He was Fatima's father. So he had stayed in Fatima's house on one of these 4 trips that he had gone across the border. He is a distant relative of your mother, his father had told Najib. So his father, Najib's father had told him, Kale Shah is a distant relative of your mother. Kale Shah was tall and well-fleshed. Tall and well-fleshed means fat, and his thick-jowled face, thick-jowled, that is heavy jaws with folds of skin hanging from the chin. So he had heavy jaws and folds of skin were hanging from the chin. So his thick-jowled face had a purple tinge about it, as if somewhere along the way he had got stuck with a discolored patch. So what kind of person was Kale Shah? He was a clove seller. He was tall and big bodied, that is very fat. He had a thick jowled face. He always wore a tahmat of black and white checks. Tahmat is like a lungi, and this color it was, black and white checks wala lungi he used to wear. Within a day, Najib discovered that the fellow was an absolute rogue. So that one time that he stayed with Kale Shah, when he went with his father across the border, that one particular visit Najib discovered, Najib understood that Kale Shah was an absolute rogue. Rogue means a cheat, who drove such a cussed bargain. Cussed means hard bargain, that for the first time in his hearing, his father started mouthing obscenities. Obscenities means started using abusive words. Gali diya, his father, because Kale Shah made a hard bargain. So he must have helped in selling the tendu leaves, and he had bargained with Najib's father. But his daughter Fatima was a hoor with eyes so bright that they would have lit up the darkness of the underworld. But then his daughter Fatima is described here. She was a hoor with eyes so bright that they would have lit up the darkness of the underworld. So Najib says that Fatima was a hoor. Hoor means a heavenly beauty. And she had bright eyes, so bright that she would have lit up the darkness of the underworld. This world where she was staying was a place where smugglers used to come. So her bright eyes was bright enough to light up the darkness of the underworld. She was taken by this quiet, pleasant young man, so ready with his smiles. Which young man? Najib. She was taken by this quiet, pleasant young man. She was quite impressed by Najib when she saw him for the first time. So ready with his smiles. He always had a smile on his face. But she could hardly elicit a word out of him. But she couldn't get a word out of him. He wouldn't open his mouth. He was very quiet. Fatima had been under pressure to get engaged to someone in the village known for his slurred speech and grotesque stammer. Before this, her parents, they were forcing her to get engaged to somebody from their village. And what kind of person she was going to get engaged to? He had a slurred speech. That is, he couldn't speak properly. And he used to stammer. Haklaate the. He had a grotesque stammer, funny stammer. Just my luck to run into mutes. She laughed back. So the person whom her parents were telling to get engaged to couldn't speak properly. And this boy, that is Najab, that who had impressed her, she found that he wouldn't speak a word. He was very quiet. So she's telling, just my luck to run into mutes. Mute is a person who cannot speak. So she's telling, I only come across such people. Either they cannot speak properly or they won't speak at all. She laughed back. And in the evening, when Fatima repeated the performance and her face flooded with excitement as if she dared him to take the next step, he had flung his arms around her in a reckless, dizzy moment. So, when he had first visited Fatima's house, and in the evening she had dared him, but what did he do? He had flung his arms around her, that is, he had hugged her. Yes, he would come again, he told her, and saw her start with disbelief. Saw her start means she was surprised when he told her that I will come back to take you from here. For he had seemed to have answered her inarticulated question. She had not directly asked Najab whether he would come, but from her attitude he had understood it, and he was telling her that I will come and take you from here. Would he come again? So she is doubtful. Tabbi, she is doubtful. Would he come again? This time he would come alone with no father or uncle. So he told her, I will come to take you from here, but I will come without any other person. No uncle will be there with me, no father will be there to cramp his style, to restrict his style. He would come all alone to take her. And as he left, he looked behind to find her gaze following him, her eyes like a pair of storm lanterns in the dark. So as he left, the first time he had visited her, as he left, she looked after him. Her look followed him as he left. And here her eyes are compared to a pair of storm lanterns in the dark. Storm lanterns are lanterns that are used in stormy weather during the night. So just like the storm lanterns, her eyes were very bright. Ever since his return to Khavda, Najab had been straining to get away. So after that first visit that he had made to Kalesha's house, he was waiting for a chance to again cross the border all alone. What was there about the run that he did not know? Yes, 4 times he had gone across the border, and he's thinking, I know everything about run. There's nothing that I do not know. He could cross the run in the daylight, leave alone starlight, a thing none of his elders had dared to do. He was so confident that he could cross the run in the daylight, that is during the daytime. And he is thinking, I can even cross the desert run of Kutch even in the night. I just need starlight, even moonlight is not needed. The light of the stars are enough for me to cross the border. His elders, that is other smugglers, older people, they wouldn't have dared to do it. Because in a desert, unless you know the way very well, you can easily get lost. And desert is a place where it is very hot and dry. And if you've lost your way and you cannot come out of the desert, one can even die. And here the desert was along the border between two countries. So it was a very dangerous place to cross without help. One morning Aftab was woken up by a shout from Zaman. "What does the old rogue want?" he muttered, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Zaman asked about Najib's whereabouts. Who was Zaman? He was the old smuggler with whom Najib had crossed the border earlier. So, after Najib left his village to cross the border alone, the morning after that, Zaman came to Najib's house. Aftab is Najib's father. So, Zaman came to Aftab's house or Najib's house and is asking Aftab, calling out to Aftab and asking Aftab about Najib's whereabouts. The boy has been sulking of late, but he should be around. So, Aftab को कुछ पता नहीं है. He's telling Najib इधर ही कहीं होगा. Anyway, what business is it of yours? So Najib is asking Zaman, why do you want to know where my son is? The old man did not hide his irritation. Aftab was irritated with Zaman and he is angrily talking to him, telling him, why do you want to know where my son is? Who are you trying to fool, Aftab Mia? Asked the smuggler. Don't you know that Allah Rakha is also missing? So the smuggler, Zaman, is telling Aftab, don't try to fool me. Your son, Najib, is nowhere around here. Your camel, Allah Rakha, is also missing. So, going with the camel ka matlab hai, he must have gone a long distance, like across the border he must have gone. And we read earlier that Zaman was an old smuggler who was like the head of the smugglers of that village. So without his permission, usually nobody used to cross the border. And now Najib had gone without getting permission from anybody. Actually, he had gone without getting permission even from his father. He hadn't informed anybody about his travel across the border. In these border villages, the pattern of life was such that if a man was absent along with his camel, it was taken for granted that he had made a foray across the desert into Pakistan. So, people over here in these border villages, they understood that if a person was missing along with his camel, then it meant that he had gone across the border, made a foray across the desert. Foray means a trip, a journey across the desert into Pakistan. Aftab went into the mud enclosure where his camel was kept and found it empty. So Aftab did not know anything about Najib's going and he did not know that Allah Rakha was also missing. So he went to the place where the camel Allah Rakha used to be kept and he found it empty. His heart sank. Then he understood that Najib must really have taken the camel and gone across the border. And we find his heart sank, means he was disappointed because he had not known anything about Najib going like this. Najib had not told him anything. He ran into the house to see if the bundles of tendu leaf he had brought had been taken by the boy. Oh, the fool, that son of a fool. exclaimed Aftab, almost shaking with fury. He has forgotten to take the leaf with him. So he went into the house to see if Najib had taken the bundles of tendu leaf to sell across the border. But then Najib had not taken the tendu leaves. So he is cursing his son because he thought Najib had forgotten to take the tendu leaves. But actually Najib had no intention of selling any of the tendu leaves. He had gone across the border to bring back Fatima. "Who are you trying to fool with all this drama?" called out Zaman, who was still standing at the door. Zaman, when he saw Aftab running about to find out about the camel and about the tendu leaves, Zaman thought that this was all a drama. Zaman thought that Aftab actually knew about Najib's going. "This son of yours is not as innocent as the world believes. He is a pig and the son of a pig." So Zaman is cursing both Aftab and his son. He is telling, your son is not a very innocent boy. He has gone with his camel across the border. There was no limit to his chagrin. Chagrin means disappointment. Zaman was the chief, the man who kept the rangers across happy. Rangers refers to the troops or guards along the border. So Zaman was the chief of the smugglers in that village, and he was the one who used to bribe the rangers, the guards along the border. Anyone crossing the run without his support was running the gauntlet with the law. So those who tried to cross the desert without Zaman's support would be in danger with the law. And here this fledgling had blundered in without as much as a word to him, or a salam, or 100 rupee note. This fledgling means an inexperienced person, had blundered in. Blundered means moved in. He had moved in just like other smugglers. He had confidently gone across the border. This fledgling refers to Najib. He was inexperienced, not like other smugglers, but still he had gone across the border without a word to Zaman. He had not spoken or got permission from Zaman. He had not told him salam or he even bribed him by giving some money. "May Allah bring him safely out of this," said the old rogue piously. He means just the opposite, thought Naftab. The Zaman, the old rogue, the cheat, Zaman is telling, may Allah bring him safely out of this. May God keep him safe. But then Aftab, the father, when he hears it, he knew that Zaman meant just the opposite. He did not really care about Najib's safety. Aftab knew that. Nothing would please him more than to see Najib turned into carrion with vultures hovering around. Aftab knew that Zaman would be pleased if Najib died as he got killed as he went across the border. Turned into carrion means to find him dead. He would be pleased to find him dead. And vultures coming and eating up his body, his dead body. Aftab knew that Zaman would be pleased to see that Najib is killed as he crossed the border. Don't worry, Zaman, Allah will see him through, he said testily and banged the door in the smuggler's face. So, Aftab, angrily, he is closing the door. He is telling Zaman, don't worry about Najib, God will see him through. So we stop the video for this we stop the lesson for now. We'll continue with the lesson in the next video.